Welcome to the Rebel Rise podcast, a place where badass women like you come to connect, learn, and grow. Here, we celebrate the relentless spirit of women who dare to dream and design their own destinies. Now, this is your time for no bullshit, so no subject is off limits. This is a time for you to collect inspiration and create the vision for your life. Get ready to break free from societal expectations, take your power back, and step into your dream life. Your empowerment journey begins right here. Let's go. So we have somebody very special on the podcast today. And I know I say this often because I love all of my podcast guests so much. But we have one of my best friends from high school on the podcast today. We have Miss Maddie Worley, who is going to be a wealth of information for everybody today because she has been a social worker for the last 13 years. And she's shifted her focus a little bit to be more on the workplace health and culture space to show everybody that there is a space at the table for everybody. And so this is going to be a fantastic conversation. I'm so excited to have you. I'm sure we're going to have some really fun and interesting conversations given our history, but welcome to Rebel Rise, Maddie.
Yes, thank you, and I am excited to be here. And yeah, it's been a minute since we've seen each other. So this
It's been
is
a long time.
I know, it's like an extra treat that I get to hang out with an old friend.
Well, we'll have to talk a little bit about our history. We'll have to share a
Yeah.
little bit of that with our viewers or listeners, whichever they're doing. But can you tell them just a little bit about you and your background and kind of what brought you to be who and where you are today?
Probably much like a lot of people when you're trying to decide what you want to do when you grow up. And sometimes I still am trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up. I somehow landed on social work pretty early on. I liked the flexibility of it. I liked being able to kind of move around in different spaces, which was a great fit for me, coming from a space that I liked to be involved in so much. So I went and got my undergraduate degree in social work, continued to love that industry, and I actually worked at a high school in the place I graduated from, like in the community I graduated from. So I worked at a high school for a couple of years and then got my master's degree in social work. So I've worked mainly in the nonprofit space, working with at-risk youth, and I've just learned so much from different experiences, different kiddos dealing with different things. But I was always passionate about moving into a different space. And so I currently am now working still kind of with youth. I work with queer youth at our local nonprofit, helping with suicide prevention. But then I also work with adults. Mainly, I try to work with LGBTQ plus adults and how to navigate the workplace being who they are. And I live in a state where sometimes that's a little bit harder to do. And there's a lot of fear around being able to say, like, hey, I'm gay, or I'm non-binary, I'm trans. And so kind of giving them support that they need to navigate those discussions in a professional and healthy way so that they feel safe in the workplace that they are in, and how to deal with any issues of discrimination and such.
It's such good work you do. And I want to dive into this because something we talk about a lot on this podcast is the whole journey of becoming and opening yourself up to being who you actually are. Because some of us, we know who we want to be, and we feel like we have to hide for some of us years and decades. And there's others who don't actually know what they want, and they've never taken the time to ask themselves what they want and to explore that. It's almost like sometimes we don't think we have an option. We don't think we have a choice, but to follow the path that we were taught we needed to follow, whatever that looks like, right? So, in your experience, like what has that journey been like for you, if you're comfortable sharing? And what kind of advice would you give to people who are struggling with that now?
there's been like two instances in my life of this idea of coming out, I guess, as a gay person, but also, so it's like in my personal life, I was, having to come out to my loved ones and embrace that part of my identity and be comfortable with that and navigating some hard conversations. And it looked differently across the board, and it was sort of in my own time with different people, which I'll also encourage for anyone else who might be in a similar situation, even if it's not with your sexuality or gender, but if you are trying to have a hard conversation with your loved ones, do it in your own time, right? There's not sort of a playbook for, oh my gosh, you have to do it within X amount of time. You do it the way that feels authentic and comfortable for you. And then make sure you have like a support person in case things don't go according to plan. And that was sort of in that space. But then in my workspace, I've had some moments of kind of redefining things. And that actually was a little bit harder. I always saw myself working with youth, and I was in a nonprofit that I loved. I loved the work that I did, and I had actually grown within the agency into a leadership position, but I started experiencing burnout, which is common in my profession, and that stems from I was more worried about helping other people than helping myself. So I was
Mm.
not practicing self-care. I was not doing a very good job at taking care of myself. And it started to show up in my job, and I was not as passionate anymore. So I went to another job, which also was a position of leadership. And it was actually like my dream job. Like it was the job that I had been waiting for, that I was excited about it. I was like ready to take it on. And because I was in a space of burnout, I ignored some of the red flags and just pretended like they weren't there, even though I knew that they were red flags. And I experienced a lot of workplace discrimination, workplace abuse, all of this nonsense with workplace, while also not taking care of myself. Long story short, I lost that job. And it was a big sort of wake up call for me because I kind of lost connections with people that I thought I was closer with. And I kind of had a lot of self-doubt in my abilities, and kind of believed some of the narrative that was being fed to me by this person that I experienced abuse from, that I was not good at what I did, even though deep down I knew that was a lie. And so I had to spend about a year and a half kind of redefining what my passion was and refinding that in myself. And I did a variety of odd jobs because I still had a family, I still have responsibilities. I couldn't just sit on my couch and not know what to do with my life. And it was a really hard time of my life, where I had to really own up to some of my mental health challenges. I had to have some tough conversations with my loved ones. But then I had to figure out what was the best fit for me that I was going to be happy with, and that would kind of reignite that passion for change that I knew I was built for, and I knew that I was capable of in the communities I'm with.
Because it speaks so much to your journey, right? And being resilient and passionate and knowing what you want, right? And so, and I think you're somebody who's just such a good example of fighting through that adversity, right? And just saying like, okay, this didn't work out for me. That's okay. Like, let me find another door, another path, another way to go until I can find something in my life that works for me, until I can find something that makes me feel like me, like lit up and passionate about life. And um, it's so interesting to me. I'm going to kind of shift here for a second because I'm feeling led in this direction, but
Yeah, go for it.
it's so interesting to me because when you're young, right, like you have this personality, and especially with you and me, right? I'm thinking specifically of like our dynamic, right? Like super goofy theater kids thinking like we ran everything, right?
Which
And
we did. We low key did.
we still did. Yeah, I totally maintain that. Absolutely. And then you become an adult and you're like, okay, now I have to be serious.
Hmm.
Now, like nothing that I used to love matters, right? And you're like, well, I have to be an adult and now I have to like be boring, basically. And what I found is it's been this, at least for me, like my own personal journey of like resilience and finding those doors that open for me when one slams shut in my face like that is just a journey back to myself. And I know we were just talking about this a little bit before we started recording, but how we still kind of feel like we're in high school,
Hmm.
which is a great feeling. We're like, how are we 35? Like, how are we here already? And I think some of that is this journey that you and I have both been on with this becoming, right? It's kind of, and I don't know if you've had a similar experience or revelation, but I feel like I've kind of come home to myself. Like,
Hmm.
I'm always learning new things. I'm always growing and becoming a new version of myself. But I'm finding that the more I align with that version of myself, the more true I am to myself, then the more closely aligned I feel with that weird girl version of myself that I was like back at Mingus when we were just being,
Hmm.
weirdos backstage. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. I think a lot of people go through that stage in their life, whether it's in their work, their personal life, whatever it is. And sometimes it takes them a minute to get to that point of being able to label it the way that you just did. Example, all of the stuff I went through with my work, I was angry for a long time about how everything happened and some of the aftermath. And I kind of sat in that for a long time. And I had to work through those feelings of being angry, being depressed, being in my feelings. I had to work through that. I had to heal from some of that to get to a point where I can now say, now what? Something good has to come of this. And shameless plug, that is what has now prompted my business partner, my former coworker, actually, Megan, and I to now launch our own podcast called Not a Lonely Coffee Break, where we are
It.
actually going to talk about some of this stuff. And it is rooted in the shared sort of experience of trauma that we both had to heal from in our own time so that we can get to a space where we're going to talk about it in healthy ways and support other people who might be going through similar situations. And I think everyone has a point in their life that they kind of have to have that similar journey. They're healing from something. It may not be this huge trauma, but they're overcoming something in their life to
Mhm.
get to a point where they are maybe a better person or a better version of themselves, even, or another version of themselves, whatever that is. So yeah, I think it absolutely makes sense.
Yeah. And, everybody's journeys are so different, right? And there's a lot of, toxic positivity things that fly around on the internet as well. And I know that I know it's a thing, I know it exists, but what I try to remember when I see those things is that everybody's journey is so different, right? Like we can't judge somebody for struggling with depression or somebody for being toxically positive if we don't live in their life, right? Like, we don't walk in their shoes. We
Right.
don't know what their
Mm-hmm.
view of the world is, right? They're all very different paradigms. And so I I like what you just said, right, about kind of meeting people where they're at because my journey, like the clients that I have, are very on a very different journey than the clients that you have, right? And there's no right or wrong. So anybody who's listening to this, like if you're feeling like, on either side, like maybe you can't like maybe you feel like you're in the middle of those two things, that's totally fine too. Like there's always going to be somebody to meet you where you're at. But what I feel like where this conversation is going, right? I feel like you're going to have a really good understanding by the end of this episode that there is always a solution for you. There is always a way out. There's somebody who can help you no matter where you're at in your journey. And I genuinely feel I'm so passionate about it. I really feel like everybody needs to find a way to connect with themselves. Like they need to find a way to be able to be the most genuine version of themselves. And Maddie, I don't know if you and I have ever had this conversation because it's been like so many years since we've talked,
Mm-hmm.
right? But like this is something I say all the time. And, one of my other best friends that I talk to a lot, he's gay as well. And his dad was a pastor. And it was hard for him also to like to come out, right? And I know so many people like this who they feel like they have to hide their whole lives for fear of judgment, right? And that has to be the most terrible thing in the world. And so this is, I'm saying this for everybody. Like I just use that as an example, but to have to go through life, no matter what the situation is, whether you're gay and you need to come out, or you know that there's more for you in life than just being a married woman and having children or whatever it is, right? To like hide that inside of you for your entire life to me is absolutely heartbreaking. So I know we're probably only 15 minutes into this episode and I'm getting like I'm going in on it right now, but like I really mean it. Like it to find a way to find that door that opens up for you where you can just be yourself no matter how uncomfortable it is, because that situation I just used as an example, super uncomfortable, I'm sure, but like to be able to do that and then to be able to live in your full authenticity and to be able to be who you are, like so freeing no matter what your journey is. So no matter where you come from, what your experience is, just know that if you seek and you try to find the right kind of help for you, that there is something on the other side that is just, it's like so freeing.
Yeah, no, it is. And for some people, I mean, I think for a lot of people though, that journey doesn't like using gay as an example because I am gay and I have experience in this. Um, it's not just a one-time coming out thing.
Right.
Right? So you come out, you tackle the big scary first time saying those words out loud, but it is an ongoing thing. And even after you come out, sometimes you're still kind of figuring out what that looks like for yourself, especially if you came out a little bit later. I didn't come out until after college, um, fully. I was out in college, but I did kind of stagger who I came out to in that space. But a lot of people do come out later in life, and so they're kind of exploring parts of themselves that they didn't get an opportunity to explore earlier in their life. And so you are still kind of figuring out yourself all during your life. Like you don't have to have everything figured out by XYZ. I don't like when people ask me that question, like, so what's your 5-year plan? I'm like, I don't know.
I hate that. I
Who,
hate that
who
question
knows
too.
where they're going to be in 5 years? Because I don't.
Yeah. And I also, I'm not the same person I was
Yeah.
5 years ago, and I won't be this person in 5 years either. So I agree. I hate that question.
Yeah, I don't like that question. I'm like, I don't have a 5-year plan. I have a right now plan.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I like to and I used to be very much like a plans person. And it was honestly
Mhm.
when I was the most miserable, I think, where I had to know everything ahead of time. And now that I've shifted kind of into that ambiguity of living, of being curious, because like you just said, like, okay, yeah, you knew you wanted to come out and you staggered it with some people, and there's other people you told right away, probably people you intentionally saved for last as well, right? And so, but like, you're always still learning yourself, you're always still learning who you are. And since there's ambiguity in there, there's fun in there, there's play in there, and like these things that you get to explore if you choose to embrace it in that way, like there's so much. I've always been like a very glass half full type of person. So I'm just like, there's so much beauty in there to explore and so many things to get to see and to learn about yourself. Because even though we like are the most intimate with ourselves, we like in this day and age, we just don't take the time to get to
Hmm.
know ourselves and to explore.
Well, I think it also, though, it's not necessarily that. It's sometimes the scary parts.
Mhm.
We don't want to explore the scary parts even in ourselves. And so, why on earth would I want to explore that with someone else when
Yeah.
I don't even want to explore it?
Mhm.
Um, and that's where I like to hang out as a social worker in those scary
Yeah.
parts, those uncomfortable parts. But I think that that's really where true change can sit, is when you tackle some of those scary parts and you're not afraid to mess up as you figure it out. Maybe get a little dirty in the process. But then you do come out on the other side with a deeper understanding of yourself. I shared a little bit with you before we started. I was diagnosed with PTSD, and I'm a social worker. And sometimes we make the worst kind of clients because we push it aside, right? We are focused on other people. And so, my when I was going through some of my really dark, rough patches, I knew that there was some stuff going on. I knew I was having some mental health stuff, but I truly did think that I was like, it'll be fine. I'm just angry, whatever. But it was actually my mental health. And it took my wife willing to say, like, you have got to talk to someone. Like, I am concerned. I am worried about you. You have got to talk to someone other than me. And that was when I was finally able to start to move past it and work through it because I was willing to talk about it to a therapist. And I was able to kind of work on myself and address those hard things instead of just saying, I'm angry that this happened to me. I was able to kind of navigate deeper conversations about it, which has helped me get to the other side. If my therapist is listening to this, she's going to be like, Yay, I'm so proud.
I bet she would be for sure. And so this is interesting. So like the therapy piece aside, right? Even with that and like holding on to something that is diagnosed as PTSD, like outside of that too, I feel like it's really hard for us to ever admit that we want help. Like
Hmm.
even outside of that, right? We're like, nope, I've got it. I'm good. Like, let me
Yeah.
just handle this, right? And it sounds like it was a really similar experience with this too, and you don't even realize that something is that wrong. So,
Hmm.
what advice would you give to somebody, having the social work background, who, no matter where they're at in life, if they're just like, nope, I got this, and I can't talk about it because women
Hmm.
don't want to talk about things, and men don't want to either, but it's kind of a different thing. So, what would you suggest to anybody who's listening, feeling that way?
Well, first of all, the first thing for everyone to kind of acknowledge is that we all have mental health. So sometimes it's the word mental health that makes it scary because we get all of these images from what, we see portrayed in movies or perhaps people outside who are homeless, unhoused. We get those images and that's scary. But yeah, everyone has mental health just like we all have physical health. And so it's like, okay, if you were feeling sick, like physically, and you were not getting better, wouldn't you consider talking to your doctor to perhaps see if there was a medication or something that would help you feel better? Most people answer with yes, absolutely. Okay, so you go to the doctor. If your doctor prescribes you high blood pressure medication because they determine that you have high blood pressure, would you take that medication? Well, yeah, absolutely. Mental health works the same way. If you are not feeling like your best self, um, maybe you need to talk to someone. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to take a medication. Some people do. But yeah, if don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it. Um, and don't feel embarrassed by it. Because there's nothing to be embarrassed by. Some people are better at navigating mental health than other people. Um, and that's okay too. Some people need that help to get through rough patches. But yeah, I think that's the biggest piece of advice is just first taking a step back and realizing that everybody has mental health and we should treat it the same way we treat physical health, which is when something feels off inside of us, get a checkup.
I love that. And even when we're not talking about like doctors and therapists, right? Same thing,
Hmm.
like you go into the gym and you work out. So, like,
Yeah.
how can you practice your mental
Mhm.
fitness in that way as well? And sometimes it can just be as simple as like reaching out to a friend. Like, I can't even think
Absolutely.
of how many times with my close friends, I sit down with them at dinner or something, I catch up with them and they're like, telling me these awful things that have happened to them. And I'm like, why didn't you tell me? And they're like, well, I didn't want to bother you. And I'm like, you're never bothering me. Like, if you need me, I will always answer the phone. Right. But then you flip the script and I'm the same way. Or if I'm going through something, I'm like, I'm not going to call anybody,
Oh
you
yeah.
know?
Yeah, no, so absolutely though, just find things that you like to do that help you feel better. A lot of people can resonate with stress, so like correlate it to stress. If the word mental health is still scary for you to even think about, we all get stressed out. We all have hard days. What helps you unwind in that day? Maybe it is unwinding at the end of the day with a close group of friends and having a healthy amount of wine. Um, uh, right? Having a glass of wine or two. Now, if you're drinking like multiple bottles of wine all by yourself, we might be moving into more of a problematic area, um, but yeah, if that's helpful for you, go for it. Sometimes just talking it out with our loved ones is awesome. Some people have told me they really also like, especially if they have families. Vanessa, I know this doesn't apply to us, but other people who are our age might have families with children.
Yep.
Um, some people really find joy in hanging out with their kids at the end of the day. And I've had other people say, oh no, I need a break from my children sometimes. You do you.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, find those things and connect to and make time for it. That's really where people miss the mark. They can all
Mhm.
say like, "Oh yeah, I like to do this, 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 this." It's like, "Okay, when was the last time you did those things?" Never. Because we don't
For like
make
10
time.
years.
Yeah. So you have to not only say that these are things that help me feel better, but then you have to make time for it. Even if it's just like 10 minutes in your day, 5 minutes. And then you can build up and that becomes part of your routine and you will feel better. I promise. That's a promise I can keep because I know that you will feel better
Mhm.
when you build it into your routine.
Yeah. And that just goes back to too, you have to do the work, right? You can't
Yeah.
just sit around and hope somebody else does it for you or
Mm,
somebody's going to give you all the answers. Like
mm,
the the fulfillment, the happiness, the security in who you are comes from that, right? Like that exact thing. But you're right. Like you do have to make time for it and you have to be honest. Like you just said, some people are like, oh, I just want to hang out with my kids. And other ones are like, hell no, get those kids away from me. Like I need a break. And that's
mhm.
okay, right? Like I'm a dog mom to the core. I've got two dogs, and some days I'm obsessed with them, and I want to just like squeeze them till there's nothing left because I love them so much. And then there's other times where I'm like, get away from me for a few minutes.
Yeah,
Like,
you are
give me
suffocating me.
yeah, like and so I think also giving yourself grace in those areas too, but just knowing and being honest about what you need for yourself in that moment. Is it some silence? Do you need to just sit in a closet? Do you want to read? Do you want to journal? Is it
Mm,
helpful to get sun first thing in the morning and meditate or whatever that looks like for you? Like how does it help you to connect to yourself? How does it help you to be closer to yourself? And how does it help you to decompress? Because that is a huge piece of it is we are like so conditioned to never slow down and to stare at screens all the time that we're constantly like our bodies are like this and we don't even know it.
yeah,
For anybody
absolutely.
who's listening and not looking, it's we're like hunched up and tight, right? Like we don't that has a huge component tied to your mental health.
I think the other sort of big aspect of it is like when you focus on every piece of yourself, not just your physical health, but even when you're sort of when you talk about self-care, you can even explore different dimensions of it. It's not just necessarily physical, where I'm like, oh, I'm exercising, right? What are you doing to take care of yourself emotionally? What are you doing to take care of yourself financially, spiritually? Occupationally. So you can break it down even into all these different dimensions and explore what that looks like. But it also when you are feeling better about yourself and you are sort of feeling your most healthy, it also improves your relationship to others. My relationship was in a rocky place when I was in my darkest because I I was struggling. But by reinvesting in myself and getting to a point where I was able to be a little bit more healthy, it changed the way that I communicate with my wife and how she communicates with me. We've been able to kind of move into better ways of having dialogue about some of these hard things that previously maybe we didn't talk about as much. Um, but yeah, it's definitely improved. And we've made time to spend with each other because that's something that we're like, we need this. We need to make sure that we're connecting because we enjoy spending time with each other. So it's sort of, it has like this ripple effect and that it starts to show up in other parts of your life when you are taking care of yourself and focusing on you.
I think, when you focus on yourself, your self care, your self worth, that kind of leads you on this journey without even trying necessarily to be more authentic and to be
Yeah.
in alignment with who you are. And for me, that journey started with affirmations, funny enough. Like
Hmm.
I was in this really bad spot in like during the pandemic, like right before the pandemic, my life kind of felt like it was falling apart. I had a relationship end. I switched vehicles. I switched homes. I watched my little sister get married like 2 weeks after this breakup. And so I had a lot of crazy things happening in my life. And then boom, we had like shut down, right? Like
Hmm.
and then we all thought we were going to die. At least I thought we were going to die for like a solid week and a half or 2 weeks. It was scary, right? And
Um,
so, but then that's kind of like where my catalyst was like I had to then sit there by myself and figure out, okay, why are all of these negative people finding their ways into my life? Why does my life feel this way and look this way? And why do I feel like at the time I was also being bullied and harassed in my workplace.
mhm.
And I felt like I had nobody there. And so I
Huh.
felt so lonely. And then to physically be forced to be lonely and you're sitting and you're confronting yourself. You have nobody else but yourself. At least for me, I had a roommate who we didn't really talk at the time very much. Um, so I really just had myself, and it was a really interesting journey. And I had this wake up call where I was like, wow, I don't even think I know much about myself or the direction that I want to be going in, but I know that where I'm at now is not what I want. I don't feel like myself. I was at my least healthy, probably mentally and physically. Like I had started to kind of take care of myself, but I just wasn't there. And so it was like the first thing was incorporating more movement, but also affirmations, at least for me. So
Mhm.
is there anything like if you had to like share like one or two things to just get started on? Like for me, I'd say movement and affirmations. But when it
Right.
comes to the journey of like finding yourself and authenticity, what would be like the simple, tangible things you would recommend?
Yeah, I think, one thing that a lot of people I know say helps them, and it's gonna sound cheesy when I say this word because it's a buzzword,
Mhm.
um, is mindfulness and mindfulness activities. And yes, I understand mindfulness is like, what does that even mean? But mindfulness is really just about making space to be present in the moment. And sometimes that is hard for people to do because we are in a society we're constantly moving to the next thing. We're keeping ourselves busy. So by taking even 5 minutes out of your day to literally close your eyes and take some deep breaths to ground yourself in the moment, that can be a huge like catalyst towards positive change in your life. And that's like a simple mindfulness activity. You don't even have to have like someone reciting a meditation to you or doing all of these fancy things. It's literally just taking some deep breaths with your eyes closed. And then if you like it, you can branch out and try some other mindfulness activities. But that's what mindfulness is all about, is just being in the present and finding that present to stay grounded in. And yeah, I think everyone needs that. That's probably the big one. I think that and maybe just making time, like, which ties more into present, like making time for the people that you care about. It doesn't even have to be like a romantic partner. It can be close friends, family, but like that's another thing that sometimes gets brushed aside. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, I'll see you later. We'll get together another time because I've got this other thing going on. That's a big part is human connection, right? Having some sort of connection to someone else. That was honestly what was a big issue during the pandemic for so many people
Yes.
was they came from a very connected culture and community, and now we were saying, nope, no connection because you might die. And so it was prompting feelings of loneliness, nervousness, worry, depression, and anxiety. The research says that it skyrocketed during the pandemic in people because of those reasons. Loneliness was a big thing. So just making sure that you're making time for your loved ones. I still actually FaceTime with I started FaceTiming during the pandemic, like with my grandparents and parents. And now I like only FaceTime because that was something that I was like, this is a way that I can still, even though we're like far apart, we can still have this connection.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I'm not an iPhone user, so I can't FaceTime anybody.
I think, are you Android?
Uh-huh.
I
Yeah.
think yeah, I think you can do
There's
it
a
with
hack, I think.
yeah, I think you can do it with other Android phones.
Yeah, it's like Google Meet, I think is what we
Oh
use.
yeah, yeah, Google Meets. That's what I use for my godchildren. We use Google
Yeah,
Meet.
there you go. So yeah, if you're an Android user, you can use Google Meet for that. Apple is FaceTime. I
Yeah.
don't think you can do it together. I've heard there's a hack, but I don't know what that is. But that's really beautiful too, and it's interesting because it's like two opposite experiences, right? Where like for you, what helps you to really find yourself is to be in the presence of others. And for me, what helped to catalyst me was like having to be alone because I was using other people to ignore the
Hmm.
problems that I was having then and ignore that connection with myself. So I think there's definitely a balance. So I would encourage anybody listening to just kind of look at like, what am I doing now? And like, what is the behavior to like balance that out? Because you have to have a little bit of everything. So I love that you shared that because it was the opposite of what my answer was. So I think
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
helpful. So for anybody who
Like,
felt that that was murky, it just depends on where you're at.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
it just further highlights though that like everyone's journey is different. So
Mhm.
you figure out what works for you and do it.
And so if we go back to social work, because I
Yeah.
want to highlight some of what you do because we haven't had anybody who specializes in this yet on the podcast. But
Mhm.
for anybody who, and I know a lot of your stuff is workplace focused. So for people who are like struggling to kind of communicate their needs or what they need to have an authentic experience at work, right? Maybe outside of their personal lives. What does that look like? Because I'm sure that's also kind of a different journey.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things that I find people struggling with is their ability to establish clear boundaries in the workplace. And so
Mhm.
that is where things start to get a little blurry, is when you constantly are saying yes, sure, oh yeah, and you start responding to emails past, the time that you are in the office. And now it's 10 o'clock at night and you've literally been working since 8 a.m., maybe even 7 a.m. or 6 a.m. And so being able to maybe communicate those boundaries early on, but then holding to it is where a lot of people are struggle, I find. So, and it's one thing that I've also struggled with in the past,
Same.
is that sometimes I'll say one thing, but then I do something else. So then it's kind of like, oh, your boundaries don't matter. You told me this, but here you are responding to the email. So you're giving me permission to do it.
Mhm.
Don't give them permission to do it. Um, establish the boundary, which sometimes means you have to figure out what your boundaries are. If you're someone who is willing to respond to emails past your time, fine. I don't recommend it, but fine. Go for it. Maybe your boundary is something else. Maybe what's important to you is being able to have um, a lunch break where you are not eating lunch at your office and you're actually able to leave the office and go into an employee break room or out of the office altogether for at like a restaurant or something. So maybe that's where you kind of hold firm in, no, it's really important to me that I have that step away from my computer, from my desk, so that I can kind of decompress from the morning and get ready for the afternoon. So I'm going to make sure that I take my break from this time to this time, and that's your right as an employee. I mean, obviously don't take advantage, like don't take a 5-hour break. You have a right to have a lunch. But yeah, I think boundaries is the big one. And that also sometimes it means communicating your needs about what management looks like to you.
Mm,
Um, Managers sometimes and leaders or bosses, they will have multiple people that they're in charge of. You can't always take the same approach with every individual. So as the employee, being willing to professionally and respectfully talk with your supervisors around what motivates you, what continues to inspire you. So that helps them also be a more effective leader when it comes to you. And I know, like, I'm saying all these things, and people are probably like, that is easier said than done. I get it. It is hard, but that's how we start to change workplace cultures is by having those tough conversations and holding the people who are in the positions of leadership accountable. If we just kind of say, "Oh, well, it's too hard. I'm not going to have that conversation."
mhm,
It's never going to change because we continue to give them permission to be micromanagers, to abuse their power, to take advantage of people who honestly probably don't get paid enough to do the job that they're doing, and deserve so much more. So, yeah, holding them accountable means setting boundaries, communicating your needs around what you need from them as your leader. If you are someone who needs one-on-one meetings every week, you need to sometimes ask for that. Like if I was your manager and that was something you needed, you would have to tell me that because I don't value one-on-one meetings. Like I'm like, okay, we can just send an email to check in with each other. Let's do it so that you can keep doing your work. I can do my work. If you need me, come tell me. So
mm.
if you're someone that's like, no, I need one-on-one meetings, you would have to come and tell me that so that I knew to make space to have a one-on-one meeting with you to connect and, work through any concerns that you might be having.
I love it. And that also ties back to communication as
Yep.
well, right? Like you need to have enough self-worth and self-love. And self-worth to me is like the foundation of everything, right? Without self-worth, you everything else is shaky. Like everything else in the house is just a mess, right? And so it's a good place. In fact, that's where I have most of my clients start too, is with the boundaries, because you have to have good boundaries. But to have the good boundaries, you, like you said, you got to know what you want and
Mhm.
you have to communicate them, but also enforce them. If you
Mhm.
don't enforce them, then, like you said, you're giving them permission to continue to do it because your actions aren't matching your words. So they
Mhm.
have to match. And then through that, like, oh my God, like the amount of power, if you can enforce your boundaries at work and get what you want at work, then you can absolutely do that in any other area of your life. Because I feel like in most situations, work is the hardest one to feel like you can put your foot down, right? Because they help
Mhm.
you to pay your bills. And so I feel like if you can do
Absolutely.
it there, then man, like the power that you get and the level of authenticity, it just I feel weird saying the word power because I think that's weird to a lot of people, but it is very empowering, I guess, to feel like, hey, I communicated my needs and the world didn't burn down.
Mhm.
It's okay. Like I said, I
Yeah.
wanted a lunch break. So now I get to have my lunch break because it's meaningful to me. Or I said, I'm not going to respond to emails or, whatever it looks like for you. There's such an empowering feeling and energizing feeling, at least in my experience, that comes with that. So I
No,
love
yeah,
that.
I do think, I do, I feel like there's a need to plug this. This is a time in our society where there's actually 4 generations of people in the workplace.
Mhm.
We have boomers, we have Gen X, we have millennials, and we also now have Gen Z in the workplace. And we all approach things a little bit differently. So when we talk about communication, you also have to think about, okay, the people who are typically going to be in those positions of leadership are also probably going to come from a different generation than you. So you might need to be mindful of that when you go to communicate and think about, okay, what is going to be professional and respectful for them? Because I don't want them to feel like I am disrespecting them by asking for these things for myself. That also holds them accountable, to kind of adjust some of their expectations even for the needs of other generations that are a little bit different. Um, I will say some of our younger generations do value talking about mental health, whereas our older generations are like, when I was a kid, we didn't have any of this nonsense.
Right? Mental health, what is that?
That's not real. But that doesn't mean that you can't still advocate for mental health resources in the workplace. I just
Absolutely.
like to reiterate with people sometimes about professionalism and respect. Because sometimes when we talk about like advocating for yourself and empowerment, it sometimes comes out as disrespect or unprofessionalism in the workplace. So sometimes I even have to have conversations with people around like, what does professionalism look like?
Yeah. Yeah. I think
How
it's
can we shift this and and make sure it still sounds respectful, but you're still being firm in what you are asking for?
what I've learned because I have a tendency to do that. I'm sure you probably remember from high school. I can get a little sassy, right? This is kind of where like this whole rebel thing comes from in my branding, right? Like I can. I feel like I control it well, but especially in a professional sense, like when I tend to act when I'm emotionally charged as well, and I think that's what a lot of that is. So what I've learned to do when I need to be professional is to, if I need to vent, I have somebody I know that I can go to for whatever the situation is or whatever type of setting I'm in, where I can kind of get that out and I can kind of alchemize that emotion, but also I have to make sure that I'm still not feeling emotionally charged about it when I have the conversation.
Mm,
So I
mhm,
think that that's very important to say here is absolutely stand up for yourself. It's not about what you say, it is how you say it. I'm over here still struggling with how I say it sometimes, and that's
mhm.
just old habits die hard.
Yes, I'm
But
guilty of sometimes spouting off a quickly, hotly worded email, um, because I'm operating sort of in that headspace of, I can't even believe that you asked me that. Rude.
Mhm.
And so I jot off an email. Um,
Yep.
but after I sleep on it, I'm like, oh my gosh, did I really just say that?
And
Did I
sometimes you
get
go
that?
back and reread the message and it wasn't even the way you interpreted it, right?
Yes,
You're
yes.
like, "Oh my god, I reread it." So if you take anything away from this piece, it's to just like give it a beat, like get it
Mm,
out, go vent to somebody, get that emotion out, and make sure that when you go to establish this boundary, that it's you are congruent, meaning your body language, your words, verbal, nonverbal, like those things are in alignment and that you are in a very neutral place with it because you can't be upset or angry because it's just not going to be received well. And if you really
mhm,
want to get what you want to get your boundaries set effectively,
mhm,
you have got to remove the emotion from it. And for me, it is impossible when I'm in the moment. Like I am
mhm,
hot, I am like ready to just get
mhm.
crazy. And like
Yeah,
the old version of me comes out and I've just got to give it a minute.
absolutely. Yeah, it happens for a lot of people, especially when things don't go their way.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, approaching things in a more sort of collected way does occasionally produce more positive change in the workplace.
Yeah.
And we'll be talking about more workplace stuff on my podcast, Not a Lonely Coffee Break. You
I
can
was just
check
going to
it
tell
out
you
on
to
social
plug it.
media.
Talk more about it. That's exactly was going to be my next question. So you have a brand new podcast coming out as well, which is I'm so excited for it. So no more shameless plugs. Let's just plug the shit out of it, Maddie, and let's talk about it. Tell us about your podcast.
Yeah, so I am launching a podcast in June with my business partner and close friend who also was a former coworker of mine. And we were sort of in the thick of it in the trenches together. And so we are launching a podcast called Not a Lonely Coffee Break, where we are going to talk about, of course, coffee and workplace, all the fun things that come into workplace. Um, but we are kind of going to talk about it more specifically in terms of the queer community um, and how to navigate different workplace dynamics as an individual who is LGBTQ plus. Um, but also how you can be an ally in the workplace. We actually have had a lot of people share with us, like, I just want more information about how I can be supportive when I have a coworker who comes out as trans. Um,
Mm.
so if you're kind of like, I don't really want to listen to a podcast about queer people, don't worry, it's for everyone because we also are going to talk about allyship in the workplace. And allyship can really apply to any situation. You can be an ally to anyone who's going through something
Mhm.
that is different than you. So yeah, we'll be talking about that. We have lined up some guest speakers that are going to kind of use their personal experiences um, to help us understand what it's like from their perspective. But we also are just going to kind of explore different topics about navigating different things like HR, navigating some of these conversations about boundaries and setting priorities and all of that fun stuff. As well as, um, we are launching in a conservative state um, that does have there's a lot of fear around being your authentic self in certain spaces. And so we are going to kind of talk a little bit about disclosure and still feeling safe with who you are, even if you choose not to share every part of your life in the workplace. And we're going to have fun doing it. So yes, we're talking about serious stuff, but we are going to try to make it be an enjoyable listen for you guys, or anyone who wants to check it out. You currently can find us on social media. We are on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Patreon. You can find us at Not a Lonely Coffee Break. That's our handle, like across all channels. And
Easy.
that's where we'll be announcing any of our updates and episodes and how you can access it all. But we really do hope that everyone will tune in and engage in the conversation because Megan and I, we started this from our own experience of navigating some tough things. And we want to welcome other people who are navigating other tough situations. We want to include them in the conversation. So definitely check us out in June and engage with us and let us know your experiences.
Yes, and I'm so excited for you, Maddie. I can't wait to tune in. Allyship is my jam. I love to support anyone and everyone in any way that I can. And so I want to encourage everybody who's listening, like if you aren't familiar with allyship or you're looking for that LGBTQ plus support, like this is definitely an amazing resource. It is a free resource. You are getting people who have walked through it, have lived it. It's literally their professions. And so you can't be learning from anybody better than people who have lived it. They are truly the experts in this area. And again, like if you are like, well, I'm not LGBTQ plus, that's fine. Like allyship is so important because we need to be able to band together and have that advocacy. So I am so excited for you, my friend. Congratulations on the podcast. I can't wait to tune in. I know
Yes.
you don't have an exact date yet, so we're saying June for now. And as soon as we have those updates, I will put the official date in the show notes. But I'm so excited for you. Congratulations. And thank you so much for joining me on this podcast today. I had a wonderful time catching up
Yes.
and getting to discuss all of these super important things. I know people took so much away from today. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. And everyone who listened, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Rebel Rise podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode and invite your friends to join us next week. This is your time. Now get out there and rise.